I'm sending you live now.
Well, good morning. We're here for this morning's first session where we've got Peter Bradburn, who leads IT and communication at Aspire Academy, which is quite a large trust with, I think it's 30 schools based in Cornwall. And he's had experience in primary and secondary schools. So today he's going to be looking at the practicalities of moving your school to an IT system in the cloud. So that is about as much as technical information as I am in any position to give to you. So I'm going to hand over to Peter.
Great. Thanks very much for the introduction. Yes, so I'm Peter Bradburn, and yeah, the Aspire Academy Trust is 28 primary academies spread across Cornwall. They are all primary schools. The way I'm going to kind of pitch this session this morning is explaining. I suppose it's ultimately about strategy and how you come up with a plan. And in our situation, that strategy has been based around the needs of primary schools. But my first role within education was a IT manager at a secondary school quite a few years ago, and actually a lot of the things and messages will ring true through to that. So yeah, I'll pitch this by talking about our journey towards a cloud-first strategy, and I'll talk about some of the rationale for that that decision and the strategy that we've taken. And we'll talk about some of the lessons learned along the way as well. So without further ado, we will just crack on. Just to say, we are the Aspire Academy Trust is an EdTech demonstrator, part of the DfE's EdTech demonstrator program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the session. So. When we're talking about the cloud, hopefully, current times, a lot of people have put a lot of time and effort into quickly making changes to their technology. I suspect it's likely that the vast majority of you watching will be using some sort of cloud platform already to some degree, whether it's something like Microsoft 365 or G Suite for education. And clearly the DfE have provided some assistance for those who haven't got to that point yet in terms of funding to help you get started in being able to use either a Microsoft or Google platform to be able to deliver an element of remote learning. But actually, even if you have started that journey, I suppose what we're really talking about here is a much broader cloud-based plan. So I'm talking about a process which ultimately, in our case, has ended with us ditching the server. Okay, and in our case, it's not just one server, but quite a lot of servers across each individual school. Our map, as many other maps, didn't magically come into being overnight with 28 schools, but we grew over time and inherited 28 different historical networks. Each with their own challenges, not least in terms of sort of random decisions which have been made in the past, which in terms of what money had been spent on, but we had to try and sort of pull together the different strands and come up with a bit of a broader vision and plan that we'd be able to go ahead and have where we are now, which is really one big network and a coherent plan in terms of hardware purchasing, and that has big effects then on the training and the different systems that everybody's using. So that process has involved moving our files to the cloud. It's involved looking at key apps, not least our MIS system, which is probably one of the main key apps that all schools have in common. All schools use an MIS system of one way, shape or form. And we needed to, we had 28 different servers running the MIS system. How did we go about consolidating that? Culminating in looking to just sort out the hardware in our schools, where we had lots of complicated and expensive and sometimes unreliable hardware all in place to make all these systems work. Technology has moved on, and a lot of the systems out there are much more straightforward and simple, and I guess simplicity has been one of the sort of key ideas which has underpinned our strategy. So what, why do we want to do this? I've already explained how, from a map point of view, there was that degree of complexity just in terms of different schools doing different things. And I would say, if you're listening from a map, I would certainly look to get a coherent map-wide strategy around the use of technology, and the cloud provides a nice, simple solution to that. Really, there's no reason, there's no reason why as a map you need to have lots of different accounts for all the different schools. Having single tenancies, I know this has been alluded to in other sessions across the last couple of days or so. If you're using Office 365 or G Suite as a map, I think you really need to consider having a single, what we call tenancy, one big account with lots of different sort of organisational structures within it, but it makes the whole thing a lot easier to manage. For us, being able to go to the cloud platforms, and actually I haven't told you what cloud platforms we're using. The answer is to that we're using several. We're using Microsoft Office 365, which we use for our staff. Our staff work on Windows laptops and Windows computers, and they save their files to the Microsoft Cloud, and both to the OneDrive, which is their own personal documents, and to shared areas using SharePoint. They use Teams and all those systems that go with it. In the classroom, we use very, very few Microsoft computers. We're using Google Chromebooks, and we're using iPads, both of which are managed by cloud-based systems. So the children log on to the devices, onto the Chrome devices with a cloud account, and what that means is that all of those systems, it doesn't matter if they're in use in school or outside of school. If we send a Chromebook home, everything will work the same. We've recently taken delivery of some DFE Chromebooks as part of the Devices for Vulnerable Students scheme, and that process for us in terms of getting those out, I know that a lot of folk had quite a lot of trouble with that, but for us, we turned them on, logged in with our enrolment username and password, put an asset sticker on it and put it on our inventory, and then it was good to go. And we were able to dispatch those laptops and know that they would work when at home with the students. And actually we have a cloud-based filtering platform for our Chromebooks, which we knew would automatically kick in and work from home. So we had that assurance that right away those children who were going to use those devices at home would be able to get online and be filtered. And I suppose that's functionality which under older platforms we didn't have. Another, the broader abilities and functionality that we have across our Microsoft system, significantly surpasses what we had in the past. Around, our focus is less now on just making sure the systems are working. Now the systems are managed by Microsoft, and we're able to look at doing things that we couldn't do before around data protection. We're able to make it so that we can control the flow of data better around our organisation, so that when, for example, staff are using mobile phones, their own personal phone, to access their work email, how do we kind of control the ability they've got to download data to those devices? How can we make it so that certain people can't access really sensitive data and documents? And actually these cloud platforms provide a lot of functionality around that previously was just way beyond the skills of an average school to access. This was the sort of thing that large corporations and people like local authorities would spend huge amounts of money to be able to achieve. And actually now, with the right input in terms of getting you set up, is achievable for anybody using these platforms. And I'd strongly recommend, we'll talk about how you get the most, and talking about IT support and how your IT support provider can help you get the most from these systems. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And I've talked about how in terms of things like data protection, these systems offer better solutions. Yes, it's more reliable. The systems are managed by large multinational companies, whether it's the likes of Microsoft or Google, or if it's a cloud app. These something like, in our example, we're using a cloud-based MIS system. For that provider, it's obviously their business. They need to put a lot of time and effort into making sure the thing is resilient and unlikely to go down. And if I count the problems that I've had with our cloud services going down and compare them to problems that we had with servers in the past, with hardware failing, with stuff just going wrong for unapparent reasons, we have a lot. The reliability we get through having our systems on the cloud is much greater. Security is a big thing. We've just actually gone through the process of having our first cyber security audit, which was an interesting experience, and I went into that with quite a lot of confidence because we've been able to do a great deal to secure our cloud platforms. Just to give you an example of that, our Microsoft 365 system sent me an email this morning giving me a report of user sign-in activity that it deems slightly suspicious. There were 5 sign-ins over the last few days that it thought were vaguely dodgy. I had a look at them and actually they're all okay. But how, historically, how did we know whether anybody was trying to compromise our system, even if it was in school or outside of school? How do you know if someone's starting to mess around? These systems provide that security baked in. Admittedly, that's more useful for a tech person to be able to look at and manage the network, but the cloud platform is providing us insight that we just didn't have before. Right, money. Money's a factor when making any decisions in school these days, particularly in certain times regarding budget setting. We're really trying to squeeze every last penny out of what we're doing, and a lot of that comes down to reviewing the systems that we've got, whichever those systems are, and looking at pros and cons. Do they offer value for money? Certainly, it's fair to say that our old system, the costs associated with having a server Windows-based network, and I guess a lot of this I am talking about that kind of Windows-based server that you'd have in school, would have the cost of paying for the thing in the first place, which would depreciate and would at the point when the server eventually comes to the end of its life would need to be replaced. We have that. I had an example of our smallest school, 40 pupils, St Maur's Primary School, out in a very picturesque spot in Cornwall, and actually not long before we took them on in our trust, they spent a huge amount of money on a new server, a very nice server, don't get me wrong, but actually per child the cost of having that server was actually quite high. Then we've got the cost around things like software licensing, an ongoing, an annual agreement that the schools will have with Microsoft to license the network. Admittedly, if you're using Microsoft devices, that cost will continue, but it will transfers to cloud licensing, which covers everything rather than just the ability to have devices on your network. But you've got other things, antivirus software. We use, now that we have Google devices, well, the Chromebooks don't really require antivirus software due to the nature of the operating system. It has its own built-in securities, and actually the same is true for iPads. Really, if they're well managed, we don't run antivirus software on the iPads. But also with our Windows devices, using cloud-based management for Windows, and I'll talk about a bit more about what that actually is. We use a thing called Intune, which there's been a couple of sessions over the last few days. It's just a management platform to be able to manage the rollout of apps and settings and all those kind of bits and pieces to Windows devices, but all managed from the cloud. It has built-in antivirus protection using Windows Defender, so that's another thing we don't have to pay for. Backup. A lot of schools are paying quite a lot of money for backup platforms to back up their existing server. This is quite a contentious point around to what degree you should be backing up data on the cloud. And we do back up a lot of our shared files, but the cloud provider, whether it's Google or Microsoft, they all provide built-in backup functionality. So big questions about whether you need to be spending money on that anymore. And I suppose finally, there's this big question just in terms of, how much you then have to spend in terms of IT support to keep the whole thing running. Now, what I don't want to say is that you won't need IT support when moving things to the cloud, but actually the time spent providing technical input into your IT network can be spent in a different way. It needn't be spent on beavering away trying to make sure the server's configured and doing all the time-consuming stuff that went with that, but actually can be spent being proactive, doing proactive maintenance on devices and on cloud settings, and it can be spent on working to embed those systems in a school through training and support through a little bit of technical CPD. Now that's clearly a changing role for IT support in schools under a sort of cloud-based network, and that's we'll talk a little bit more about IT support and where we see that in the future. But there's a challenge. Some IT support providers will be better at adapting to that new future than others. And I suppose taking a step back from this, I've talked a little bit about some of the rationale. We've clearly been down this route in terms of our journey and our strategy. But really, I see this as the direction that all IT is going, really. And actually, really, if you've got a server in the school and a sort of traditional network, I think it's highly likely that you will end up here at some point. I suppose the question is just about the speed that you take to get there and the strategy that you put in place to get there. And so where do you start? You got to have a plan. And I suppose you might look at some of the rationale I've put forward there and think, well, I can see the benefits for us in terms of moving. I suppose the one thing I haven't talked about here, around the rationale is the lesson that we've all learned through the last few months, through trying to deliver online learning, and clearly, and actually not just trying to deliver online learning, but actually just trying to run an organisation when we're limited by physical access to the school. And if your staff have struggled to access files or struggle to access key systems like the MIS system, when you've been working, off-site, people working from home, and that's a clear reason you might be looking at now to change, to shake things up and start moving towards a cloud-based solution. You've got to formulate a plan, and I suppose different people will be starting from different points with this because of what the work you've already done. You may already have your email using a cloud-based platform. If you haven't, if you're still using an older system which is not really G Suite or Office 365, that is the clear starting point for you. And actually, that's where you can start to access funding via the DFE scheme to do that first initial step. They will provide the funding to help you get started and link you with a Microsoft or Google partner to do that work for you. Well, that's great. It's worth having a conversation with your IT support provider to get their take on this and try and ascertain their experience with doing this. If you've got IT support in-house, then that can be an advantage as long as your staff are open to looking at how systems can be adapted to meet changing times. If you feel like if you've got staff in-house but feel they feel like they're a little bit out of their depth in terms of using the newer technology, then look at getting some CPD for them, or look at linking up with a partner who can provide a very sort of top level degree of technical support and guidance, and actually set the wheels in motion, which your in-house tech people can then help to implement. If you're using an external company that come in every second Tuesday of the month, and I know there's plenty of this is much more of a primary thing, then certainly you need to have a conversation with them. it's a difficult for some IT tech folk. This has been a bit of a, you know, changing IT landscape of cloud systems has been a little bit of an existential crisis in terms of business models that some companies have put together around maintaining the server and providing lots of sort of expensive add-on services like the backup and all these kind of bits and pieces. And for some folk out there, they see this change as a bit of a threat. And I suppose, you know, a conversation to have with your, if you're pleased with your IT service provider, but actually they're sort of coming at it from that point of view. So, IT, you will always need a degree of IT technical support, and you know, you can have that conversation with them. But that, as I say, that changes from being very reactive and just coming in and fixing all the stuff that keeps breaking. Hopefully, you know, having cloud-based systems, stuff will break less. So your conversation with them can be more around being proactive and how they can help your school get the most from the technology, and that's very much you know, a conversation you can have with them. And if they don't buy that and are still resistant, then I would say, if you're buying in that support, it's probably time to start looking out and looking at what your alternatives are. You know, it's quite a blunt thing, but if you've got just nipping to this slide, I'm going to go back a bit, shouldn't do this, but your vision, your strategy around how you use IT should be driven by pedagogy and the needs of the school, not by what the experience of the IT service provider that you've got in school. And you've got to in order to, you know, take big steps forward, you've got to own the vision to a degree. As educationalists, you know, we're not making changes and changing the way we're using technology for the sake of the technology because there's new fancy stuff. We're doing it because actually it has a big impact on the way the school operates, because we're moving towards systems and technology which kind of just works. A little bit of an exaggeration, but actually that is, you know, simple systems which go wrong less and cost less money. These are clearly things that we need to be utilising as schools. So, you know, get that. If that's the strategy you've got in your mind, yes, you want to know how your staff can work more effectively, both in school and beyond, how they can collaborate better. You want to make sure that your systems are going to support those remote learners now and potentially in the future. That's quite a straightforward vision in some respects, and you recognise that the cloud platforms are going to help you with that. Well, great. There's the vision. If you're fighting resistance on that, then you can work with that to a degree. But there's plenty of IT support providers out there who get this totally and who can provide services to you which provide a great deal of expertise and can potentially save you money. So it's well worth considering your options if your support providers are kind of stuck in the dark ages a little bit. So going back to where do you start? Probably, you know, I mentioned about, you know, getting your email and using things like Microsoft Teams and Google equivalents. Well, I suspect the vast majority of you out there have made that step. The next step, if you haven't made it already, is to look at files. You know, files is a key. The work that we work on and collaborate with is a key part of the way we use IT in school, whether it's things that we're working on in the sort of back end, you know, planning documents, staff files, whatever they are. Look to get them moved to the cloud. There's very little reason why not to do that really these days. If you're pursuing a Microsoft based solution, then, you know, it's really easy to move your staff files to the OneDrive. All you've got to do is install a little bit of the OneDrive app on a staff computer and then copy all the documents to the OneDrive app folder, and lo and behold, all your documents are on the cloud. What are the benefits of that? Well, you can very easily click a document and share it with a colleague and collaborate, or a folder. You know, if you've got if you're in a job share, or if you've got people you're working with on a very regular basis, you can really quickly just, you know, share the file and collaborate on it in real time. Big benefits of having stuff that we, you know, folk that I know using the OneDrive take for granted these days, things like version history. We've all been there where you've made a mess of a document at some point while you've been working on it and can't quite work out well you can go back, restore to the point where you made a mistake with the document. We have this with shared documents, where people share documents out there, you know, other colleagues, and then somebody then goes and overwrites the master, and it's no problem, you can wind the version back. Of course, you know, shared documents work regardless of wherever people are. There's no need for old cumbersome shared drives on the server which are accessed via VPNs, and some of you might have that technology. Some of you might even dream of having that in these times, and ended up emailing documents backwards and forwards. Why bother when you can really easily migrate all your documents to a cloud platform? It doesn't rely on any other changes, just utilize the account you've already got. The same if you're using G Suite, you can use Google Drives and Google Team Drives and put your documents on the cloud. And I think servers or no servers, that's a very clear way to start off. And that leaves then, what does that leave on your server? Well, that probably leaves a degree of device management and maybe your MIS system, and then I'd have a look at moving those things. Your device management, historically, if you've got a server in school and lots of Windows devices, that server will be managing the settings for the Windows computers and deploying apps and managing users and things like that. Well, that can all be done via Azure and Intune for Windows computers now. It requires a little bit of setup in the first instance, but that initial kind of investment of time pays dividends in a very short period of time, because you no longer need to have the server, and the management of the device is just a lot more watertight, and I talked, all those other benefits we talked about with the cloud device in terms of having better functionality, better security, all those kind of bits and pieces. For example, an example of that is that we've rolled out multi-factor authentication across all of our users. What that means is that to log on to a computer, any of our devices, or to log on to an email account, it's no good just having someone's username and password. You need to have a access to their phone or other sort of device as well. So a user, it just adds an extra layer of security. Well, because we've got our devices cloud managed, that just works. It means that, say, a laptop is left on a bus or something like that, God forbid, we've got extra lines of security in place. Going back to what I was saying before, that's the next thing to move from the cloud. Something then just to talk a little bit about is things like MIS systems, which is highly likely to be another key app, probably the key app that you host in your school. A lot of turbulence in the MIS market at the moment. Capita Sims is the market kind of incumbent. They've got about 75% of UK schools still. Interestingly, Capita have got Sims up for sale at the moment. They're trying to shift that part of the business. I think for them at the moment, it's a very profitable part of their business, but might not be for too much longer, because they recognise there's a lot of good cloud alternatives out there to Sims. If you haven't done already, I would recommend taking a look at the MIS market and looking at what you do with your MIS system. A lot of we used to use Sims as it happened. We also used to use a lot of other third-party apps that we purchased as kind of bolt-ons for things that we wanted to do, but we didn't feel Sims could do, or just had tried with Sims before, things like assessment and other, and communications. We did a procurement exercise and did change our MIS platform to a cloud-based MIS. We use Arbor just for reference, although there's plenty of other cloud-based MIS systems out there, things like Bromcom and ScholarPack, which is more sort of ScholarPack's more primary oriented, Bromcom kind of primary and secondary, and other systems, that are pupil asset. I'd well recommend taking a look at those platforms and just weighing up, what you use your MIS system for. Would there be benefits of you moving to the cloud and having a system which can be accessed from different places? I think in the case of a lot of schools, the answer is possibly yes. If you're an academy, it might be easier for you to move than if you're an LA maintained school. Capital Sims themselves have been working on a cloud-based MIS system, which has not come to market yet and has been delayed a few times. Still unclear at what point that's going to come to the market, but it makes a great deal of sense to look at having your MIS system on the cloud. If you are using Sims and want to stick using Sims, you could use a cloud hosting provider, someone like Scomis or Capital themselves, who would actually just take your system and make it accessible from wherever via the internet, and that's an alternative as well. But certainly, I'd recommend you have a look at it. Right, a few considerations. Okay, I've talked about this sweet utopia of getting rid of all of our servers and just moving our key apps to the cloud. But there are a load of considerations and things that you're going to want to get in place generally, for a future which is very much kind of cloud-based and web-based. Anyway, even if you're not getting rid of your server and moving to the, Google Cloud or Microsoft Cloud, you in order to get the best of other apps that you're using, you're going to want some of these things in place anyway. And I suppose you've got to consider your internet connection. If you've got a flaky internet connection, see if anything can be done about that. The DfE have had via the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, there has been some funding available lately for schools who haven't had a fibre connection. A sort of at least 20 meg is the for fibre to the cabinet is the kind of, I think, was the threshold for that, targeted at certain areas of the country. But certainly, well, if you've got really poor internet, it's certainly worth looking into. Consider getting a secondary internet connection. Getting a couple of connections if it's really causing a problem. The internet is key, and if you have internet which wigs out, you're probably quite familiar with how frustrated that is. It's certainly important that you have a connection that works pretty well in order for to be able to use the cloud platform. That said, what I'm not talking about here, particularly for primary schools, is a full-on sort of industrial fibre leased line. It's not strictly necessary for what we're talking about here. There's just the sort of decent connection, a fibre to the cabinet connection or fibre to the premises will be perfectly adequate. You need to make sure you have decent Wi-Fi. Again, if you've got an old Wi-Fi network at school, it's probably well worth spending a little bit of money on that. And actually, that needn't be that expensive. In the past, I've seen schools and have done it myself, spent a lot of money on Wi-Fi connections. But really, we use equipment from a company called Ubiquiti, and it's brilliant and quite cheap, all things considered. And actually, I would look to if I was looking to upgrade the Wi-Fi for a sort of average size primary school, maybe like a one form entry primary school, I wouldn't look to be spending much more than sort of 1,500 quid. If it was a two form entry school, maybe £2,000 to £3,000 actually will give you a really super duper Wi-Fi network. The Wi-Fi technology has come on, always changing. It's good to have some of the latest equipment because it does make a big difference in terms of, again, if you've got devices which are dropping out or areas of the school which you've got where the Wi-Fi is not as good as others, it's a good thing to look at. Something I jumped out at the start, considerations. It is worth looking at the decisions that have already been made. If you've just spent a fortune on new server technology, then that might influence your time frame for looking to change things. Not that it would make it totally absurd to move to a cloud-based platform, but that would be a consideration for you. Also, if you've already started off going down the route with a particular cloud provider like Microsoft or Google, if you don't want to sort of change your mind if you've gone too far in, really. That said, we within Aspire, we actually use multiple different platforms, and I would encourage you to sort of look beyond this concept that you have to use one thing and that's the answer to everything. For us, that hasn't been the case. we use a whole load of different cloud platforms. We use Microsoft for managing our staff network, and we use Google for managing our pupil network, essentially, and it keeps them nicely differentiated. I'd encourage you to look beyond this sort of concept of having to nail your colours to a particular sort of mast of a big multinational company. Their offers are very good, but you don't have to, totally commit to one platform. You can pick and choose depending on what fits the need of different elements of your school life, and that's exactly what we've done. We feel that the Chromebooks work really well in the classrooms, and the reason for that is that the actual devices themselves, battery will last all day and more. They'll turn on almost instantly. Our children log in to them using a QR code. The younger children, they hold a QR code up in front of the device, and it logs them onto the device, and not only onto the device, but then single signs them into all of their other apps. So things like Education City or Times Tables Rockstars. They don't have to have different passwords for each account. They log in and they go straight into that. The cost of the devices for the Chromebooks is pretty cheap, and so for large numbers of devices we want to roll out across the classroom, that's great. For our staff, staff want to use lots of different apps and want that flexibility of having things like Microsoft Office and having a Windows laptop. Well, that's fine, and we cope with it that way. I'm going to just rattle on a little bit now because I'm conscious that time's getting on. If you have got any questions, do put them in the Q&A. It's worth considering privacy. Big multinational companies holding all of our data, all of our pupils' data. We have, as schools, have our own GDPR sort of responsibilities, and it's well worth considering and making clear to all stakeholders, if you are moving everything to the cloud, just making sure that everybody is aware of that and doing a bit of due diligence in terms of just checking the policies of the different companies that use to make sure that they're not going to do a running with all of your information and data. And training is a big consideration. If you're going to make big changes to the network, it's important that everyone knows what's changing and how to make the most of the systems they've got. And I know that's a big, this is a big issue for all of us at the moment, because changing times, a lot of people have been on a very steep learning curve anyway, with remote learning and trying to utilize different platforms to communicate with children at one level or another. But and the training might or equally be not just for your teaching staff and people like your admin staff, but also in terms of getting the most from cloud platforms, but also if you've got in-house technical support for them, looking at how you can benefit from that. This is the slide I sort of showed a little bit earlier on, but just to recap, if you've got a bit of a vision in your mind, you think you can say, well, this is clearly where we want to end up. Well, great, own that vision. And well, the reason we've got technology in schools is for teaching and learning. It's not just for the sake of lining the pockets of our IT providers. Our IT decision making should be driven by how effective that IT is at doing what it's supposed to be doing in school, in terms of giving staff access to be able to collaborate and communicate and be innovative and do their job. And likewise for children, we want things which are just going to work in the classroom, which aren't going to be barriers to learning, which historically a lot of IT has been. So as educationists, I think we're well within our rights to say this is where we want to go, and drive that, and hopefully take your IT support with you in that journey, and hopefully they'll be enthusiastic about that and will have their own good ideas and experience of driving that forward. But if you need to reach beyond that and get input from managed service providers, then you can do that. And there might be a little bit of investment in terms of doing that, in terms of being a bit of expertise in just to get you started, but I think you'll very quickly reap the rewards of that, and actually for short-term costs you'll see medium to long-term significant gains in terms of both time and available to that. I mentioned about if you're totally starting from a blank and haven't got a Google or Microsoft platform, well, aren't using that to deliver an element of remote learning at the moment. It's got a Google to find information on that. But beyond that, the quite a few of the different organisations contributing to this EdFest are part of the EdTech Demonstrators Programme, not least Cornerstone Trust, who are organising the event, but Aspire, also EdTech Demonstrators. And that what that programme offers, I suppose, is the opportunity for fellow educators to come alongside you and just talk through what you're doing. That might be in terms of just bouncing off your broader plan, ideas, and just seeing if you're on the right tracks. But it can also be maybe if you want a bit more in-depth conversation about devising a bit of a strategy or having some training in place around that. The EdTech demonstrators can help with that. And so all you've got to do to tap into that program is, again, if you Google EdTech, DFE EdTech demonstrators, there's a form you can fill in. And as soon as you fill the form in, then someone will come and contact you. And that, the way things I would recommend tapping into that program for would include looking at your strategy and looking at how you're going to deliver that and what training you're going to need around that. And at the very least, the EdTech demonstrators can just help, be a sounding board for that. So it's something I'd well recommend you tap in. So really, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of me yapping on about the sort of journey we've been on. It's on reflection, it's been a very positive one. I feel like we've come to this point of being able to, we've been much more able to deal with the whole challenging times thrown up by COVID, because we've gone down a cloud-based route. I haven't even talked about things like the fact we've moved our phone system to the cloud, which is being a great thing, because we our staff can make and receive school phone calls at home. Looking at making our systems available from anywhere geographically has really helped us. And if you want to speak more about this, feel free to get in touch with me afterwards, and I can and again through the EdTech Demonstrators Programme can talk about your own experiences and challenges and just talk those through a little bit. I don't know if there's any questions on the Q&A.
I can't see any questions here. I was thinking of some, but then as you went on, you answered them all. So I think it was very thorough, and I mean, it is such a timely thing to be talking about. On all the groups that I'm part of, people are constantly asking questions about using Teams for calls, and I think when you talked about privacy and stakeholders asking, is it safe? Are they? And also from a safeguarding point of view, as well as just having people's personal information up in the cloud, up there where people can't see it.
Sure. I think certainly in the last few months, for a lot of people have been very reactive. A lot of people very quickly trying to put systems in place and just do stuff very quickly, obviously in response to a very immediate need. And I hope, the next few months that people will be able to take a little bit of a step back and focus more on actually the longer term strategy, and maybe look at some of the, there's risks with making decisions very quickly around data protection and not doing, suitable due diligence around that, around safeguarding. If we're using video for doing live lessons, it can work very well, but there are safeguarding considerations we need to put in place around doing that. And actually, I hope that a lot of folk over the next few months will, if they haven't already, take a bit of a step back, look at what's gone well, look at what hasn't gone well, and look at their broader strategy to work out, where you're going to go with that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much. That was really interesting. I learnt a lot about that, because we use SCOMIS and stuff is up in the cloud, and it was really interesting. Thank you ever so much.
Excellent, no problem. Thank you.
People will be able to. Oh, is there a question that's just come in actually? Oh, you mentioned using Azure Intune for managing the Windows network. What sort of costs
are involved? So yeah, it's a good question. The costs are the licensing. And potentially the costs of getting somebody to do the setup work for you. Now, in terms of the licensing, that's hopefully quite straightforward, because a lot of schools, if you're running a Windows network at the moment, you probably pay for licensing already, a licensing agreement, which will be an annual sum. And actually what happens with Intune is that changes to be more of a cloud-based subscription. So by having specific licenses attached to users, gives you access to have, to use Azure to manage your users and Intune to manage your devices. And the classic license is the Microsoft E3 license, which if you get that will cover you for everything. If you're interested in the whole Azure Intune thing in a bit greater depth, I attended a really good session yesterday, which will be available retrospectively from Kevin Sate. It was yesterday morning, and I think these sessions are going to be made available retrospectively. So if you're interested in having a deeper dive in that and all the practicalities of that, I'd recommend having a look at that session. It's certainly, I watched that, and that was very, the technology and the processes he was talking about there are very much the ones we went along doing. So that that explains that in a lot greater detail. Another thing he talked about in his session was very much around hooking up with a partner that knows what they're doing around getting this stuff configured. It's actually, dare I say it, it's not that complicated actually, as long as the people know what they're doing, and can be very quick to implement. So you might pay someone, an expert for a day or two, and they can get it all sorted out for you. He would advocate having a relationship with a Microsoft expert. If again, hopefully you already work with a partner that have started working with this technology, you can do that. If you're using the Google technology, again, hook up with an expert, but the actual device management with Chromebooks is a lot more straightforward than it is with Intune. So there's a few costs associated with that, but certainly in our experience, it's ended up being cheaper doing it that way than using the old traditional model. So there we go.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much. We haven't got any more questions. And also for those people that are running off to another session, they need to leave the call. And brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Peter.
Thanks.
Brilliant.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.